Hi there, welcome back to the Python Mastery Crash Course for Beginners. I'm Gorret Golden. In the previous session, I covered how you can set up your Python development environment, and in this session, I'll be diving you through the very basics of Python syntax and data types. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid foundation to build onto your Python skills, so let's get started. First things first, let's get organized. Create a folder on your desktop or any other storage location and name the folder as Python projects. So inside this folder, you can go ahead and create a subfolder called basics, and this is where we will keep all our files. But before we dive into writing any code, let's talk about why we are doing this. So in programming, organization is key. Imagine trying to find a specific document in a cluttered room. It can be like a nightmare. So the same goes to coding. Keeping your projects organized helps you easily locate and manage your files, making your workflow much more efficient. So think of a folder as a container or a directory. It helps you organize your files, much more like how you organize your documents or your photos on a computer. And on the other hand, a file is a document that contains your code. So in Python, these files typically end with a .py extension, including that they contain Python code. Now, when it comes to naming Python files, there are a few conventions and best practices to keep in mind. The first one, you always have to ensure that you use descriptive names. Your file name should give a hint about what the file does. For example, if your file contains code for calculating the area of maybe a triangle, you must name it as calculate area of a triangle. But you always have to make sure that it is precise. Then we also have avoiding special characters. So you always have to stick to letters, numbers, and underscores. Now you also have to ensure that you keep the file names in lowercase. It's not a must, but it's recommended that at least you always work with files in a way that the file names are in lowercase. So by following these conventions, your projects will be more organized and your code will be easier to share and collaborate on. Now let's create our first Python file. So open your basics folder in your favorite IDE. And if you're using Visual Studio Code, you can drag and drop it. Or you can open the folder by working with commands. You open the basics folder, then within the file path, you type cmd, then enter. Then within the command prompt terminal, you type code space dot, then enter. It will still go ahead and open your folder in Visual Studio Code if you are working with Visual Studio Code. Now, with Visual Studio Code, you always have the ability of working with a graphical user interface whereby you can work with the icons, for example, the icon that creates a new file or a new folder. Now, the fact that we are going to create a new file, we can work with the graphical user interface by clicking on this icon that says new file. And the syntax of creating a new file is that we first append the file name. And for this case, the file name is going to be basics. Then we later on attach the file extension. And since we are working with Python, then the file extension must be py, then enter. And if you're not working with a graphical user interface, you can also work with the commands, whereby you can work with a shortcut Ctrl+N, and it will go ahead and create a new file. And by default, if you work with that command, it always creates a text document. So you go ahead and select the language, and if it is Python, you enter Python. So since we have already worked with the graphical user interface, we are going to keep this file in place. Syntax refers to the set of rules that define the structure of a programming language, and it dictates how words and symbols must be arranged to form correctly structured programs. In simple terms, it's like grammar in a human language. For example, what kind of rule do you follow if you are working with verbs, tenses, and all that content related with grammar. So to understand the Python syntax much better, I'm going to go ahead and create a function print that is going to go ahead and output a message called hello. And regarding the syntax, this is a function, but within this function we are having the word print as a keyword and the parentheses, these, and these become part of the syntax while working with such functions, and we shall cover this later on in the future. So for example, if you actually forgot to add the parentheses while accessing or working with this function, for example, if we go ahead and remove the parentheses, our code will produce errors because we are not following the rules or the syntax that whenever you are working with a print function, you have to access the parentheses. And whenever there is an error in your code, like some characters are in red, that means that you're not following the syntax. So whenever you are working with any code snippet, variables, data types, as we shall see with time, you always have to ensure that you are first of all conversant with the syntax before creating something. Now let's talk about comments, an essential part of writing clear and understandable code. Comments are notes for yourself and others who read your code. So in Python, you add comments using the hash symbol, and on the keyboard you press Shift then 3. So comments help explain what your code does, making it easier to understand and maintain. There are different types of comments in Python and each has its use case. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file called comments, and the first thing that we are going to talk about are the single line comments, and these are the most common and they are used to explain a single line or a small section of code. So for example, if I actually just go back to this file that we had and copy it up and paste it here, so the way we make this a single line comment is by appending a hash at the start of the code, and it's always a good practice that you comment your code while programming. So this is going to be commented as single line comment. So the code on line 2 is a single line comment, and all comments are always highlighted in green if you are working with Visual Studio Code. So the comment doesn't affect the execution of the code, but it provides valuable context. So if I try to run this file by clicking on the Run Python file icon, the script is going to be executed, and when I try to access the terminal, you can pretty see that we are not having any output. But if we try to access the basics file and run it up, you can pretty see that the output is hello. So whenever we try to run a file that is containing comments, the comments are always ignored and the code that is within the comments is never executed. So the single line comments are perfect for quick explanations or notes. So we can go ahead and comment this as well. Now sometimes you may need to write more detailed explanations that span multiple lines, and for this we use multi-line comments. So I'm going to update this to multi-line comments. In Python, multi-line comments are usually created using triple quotes. So the way we create multi-line comments, you first of all create the triple quotes and append the closing triple quotes too at the end. Then within the opening and closing triple quotes, you go ahead and embed your comment. For example, we can say this is a multi-line comment, and whenever it is a multi-line comment, actually the definition of this comment comes from its line. You always have to ensure that the comment has more than one line, and this is confirmed because you can see that on line 8 we are having this is, and then on line 9 we add the other text that a multi-line comment, and on line 10 we are having the other word that says comment. So all in all, you always have to ensure that if it is a multi-line comment, the strings or the words within the comment must be on more than one line, regardless of the length of the words in the comment. And multi-line comments are great for providing detailed explanations or documenting complex sections of code. So the other type of comments are the inline comments, and these are always placed on the same line as a statement, and they should be used sparingly and only when necessary to explain a specific part of code. So for example, if we had a variable called max and we assigned it with a value of 80, and for you to be able to make use of an inline comment, you go ahead and append the comment just after the value of the variable. So for example, we can comment this statement by saying initialize max with value 80. So whenever you place a comment on the same line as a statement, it goes ahead and makes the comment an inline comment. And inline comments are useful for clarifying a particular line of code, but they can make your code harder to read if you overwork with them or you overuse them. So always keep them short and precise. Now, keywords are reserved words in Python that have special meaning. So all programming languages actually have keywords, not only Python. And the examples of keywords are if, then we have else, then we have for. So the one thing about keywords is that they cannot be used as variable names, as we are going to see with time while working with variable names. Variables are used to store data that can be referenced and manipulated in a program. So think of them as containers for holding values. In Python, you can create a variable by simply assigning a value to the variable name using the equal signs. So other programming languages like PHP and Java, they always work with variables through variable declaration and then variable initialization, whereby with declaration we first define the data type of the variable, and then we go ahead and bring in the variable name and then assign a value. So Python is very easy in a way that we only create the variable without defining the data type and go ahead and assign it a value. So there are rules that must always be followed while creating variables in Python. So the first rule is that variable names must start with a letter or an underscore. So for example, if we went ahead and created a variable as max, and if we are starting with an underscore, then max, we go ahead and assign it a value of maybe 90. And then on the other hand, if we wanted to start with a letter, we just type max, then we assign it a value. And I'll go ahead and comment this part as variable names must start with a letter or an underscore. So the second rule is that variable names can contain letters, numbers, and underscores. So examples of this rule is 1. If we are to start with letters, we can go ahead and create a variable called age, and we assign it maybe a value of 23, meaning that this variable is only containing letters. Or you can also create a variable whereby it has a number. For example, we say age 1 and we assign it a value of 21. And cases whereby the variable name can also contain underscores. This only works if you wanted to create a variable with more than one word. For example, if the variable is going to be my age, you cannot create the variable with space and say my age, then you say 23. The syntax becomes invalid. So whenever you want to create a variable with more than one word, you have to work with an underscore. And it also works for cases whereby we also had like 3 words and we say my my new age, then you assign it to the value. So the other rule is that variable names are case sensitive. For example, we define a variable total and we assign it 100 as the value, and then we also have another variable that starts with t for the total. Actually, it's better if we assign this one with a different value. So regarding this rule, these two variables will always be different. So the other rule is that you should avoid using keywords as variable names. So the keywords in Python, we have if, else, while. These are actually examples. Then for, then we also have break, and very many other more. So there would be cases whereby you wanted to create a variable and you define the variable name as if and assign it a value of maybe 100. So this will become invalid, because whenever we are working with variables, you must ensure that you are not working with the keywords. Because now, for example, if you're accessing the if, it expects a different syntax, not assignment of a value. So this becomes false and it will always cause an error. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and comment it. So the other rule is that you must always choose meaningful variable names. For example, if you're trying to work on a project like a student grade system, and you are trying to create, or you are trying to store a mark entered by a user through the keyboard, the best way is that you define a variable called marks, and then whatever is required, like you access the input function, or maybe if by default you're going to initialize maybe 30. Now for such a system, cases whereby you create a variable called pretty, like sometimes there are cases whereby we want to create variables based on our names or something that you like. For example, you say pretty and you assign the value as 90. This will work out, but basing on the project that you will be working on, it will be irrelevant. So it's always recommended that you choose meaningful variable names depending on the project that you are working on. Now let's talk about the different naming conventions you can use for variables. These conventions help make your code more readable and consistent. The first naming convention is the snake case. In snake case, words are separated by underscores and all letters are always in lowercase. And this is the commonest naming convention for variables in Python. An example of the snake case naming convention is a case whereby you wanted to create variables that are going to store the first name and the last name of a user. So for example, we define the variable as first name, and the fact that we are trying to use the snake case, we use the underscore in a way that we are not leaving any space between the two words. And then we go ahead and assign the value, and then this will be the same case for the last name. So you always have to ensure that the words in the variable are in lowercase, and for cases whereby the variable is still having more than two words, it's always the same case. For example, if we try to update this to my first name, you can pretty see that for each new word that is included, we still make use of the underscore. We also have the camel case naming convention, and in the camel case, the first letter of the first word is always lowercase, and the first letter of each subsequent word is always in uppercase. And this kind of naming convention is commonly used in languages like JavaScript. I'm going to copy this up and paste it here. So to make use of the syntax for the camel case, you always have to ensure that the first letter for the first word is in lowercase, and same applies to these other characters that come after this letter. And then in the camel case, we do not work with underscores, but to make sure that the first letter for the second word starts with a capital letter. So I'm also going to update this by updating the N to a capital N. So cases whereby you wanted to work with 3 words in camel case, it's always the same. So the difference is that for the camel case naming convention, if you're working with 3 words for a variable name, the letters of the first word must all be in lowercase, and then the first letter for the second word must be in uppercase, and same applies to the first letter for the third word. And that cuts across if you actually wanted to make more than 3 words. Now we also have the Pascal naming convention, and in the Pascal naming convention, the first letter of each word is always in uppercase. To make use of the Pascal naming convention, we are going to make use of the snake case variables and paste them here. And to update these variables to the Pascal naming convention, you have to ensure that the F is in a capital letter, and we do not work with underscores, and then the N must also be a capital letter. Then same applies to the L and the N here. And still it is the same case if you wanted to work with more than 2 words for the variable. So the M will be a capital letter and all through. So once a variable is created, you can use it throughout your code, and let's see how we can make use of the variables that we have created. Now if you wanted to access the values of a variable, you can make use of the print function. And the way we work with the print function, you type print, then you add the parentheses. So if you want to display the value of, for example, let's say variable max, you go ahead and access the variable name by typing max. Then you can also create a new line if you wanted to display any other variable value on a different line. And on line 44, we can work with the first name. So having created that, we can now go ahead and run our file and see the output. So the output we expect is that variable called max, we must see its value printed as 30, and the variable name called first name on line 28, we must see its value printed as Gorret. And yeah, here we go. So we have 30 and Gorret. So you can also work with variables in a way that you are concatenating them. For example, we can make use of the variable called age on line 8 and concatenate it with variables on line 28 and line 29. So you can type age and then space. Then to concatenate this, you can work with the plus symbol, and then to access the value of the age, you just type the variable, then plus the name, and then the name is going to be concatenated. Concatenating is more like joining the variables together. So to pass in the first name, we are going to make use of, so line 28 and 29 is the one that is using the snake case naming convention. So this is going to be first name concatenated with the last name. Then I'm going to go ahead and run this. So now when I try to run this, we are getting an output that type error. We can only concatenate a string but not an integer. So in the upcoming videos, you're going to learn more about typecasting, whereby cases whereby you wanted to combine or to concatenate an integer with a string. You have to first of all convert the integer value from an int to a string. So for now, we are going to access the str constructor that converts an integer to a string. So when I try to run this file, we are getting the age, and the value of the age and then the word name are, so you can leave some space here. Then can try to run this again. So when I rerun this file, you can see that the output is looking better, but then the name Gorret Golden is also still concatenated without any space. So we can add some space here and then plus, then try to rerun it. So now when I rerun the file, it's executed with the updated version, and we're having the age and then the name updated together. So this was string concatenation, and we shall cover that furthermore while working with strings. You can also try to access the value of a variable by working with the f-string formatter. So with the f-string formatter, if you wanted to access the value of maybe variable 37, the one that has the first name, actually for now we can update this to Gloria. So if you wanted to display Gloria, the way you access the variable is by working with the curly braces, and then you type the variable name that you want to access. Then if you still wanted to pass in the last name, you access the braces and then pass the variable name. So I'm going to go ahead and rerun this file so that we can look at its output. So when I try to run the file, you can see that the output that we are getting is Gloria Golden. So with the string formatter, you can also pass in the age. So age, then the value is going to be, maybe it can be age 1, depending on the variable that you are working with. Then when I run the file, this is the output that is created, Gloria Golden, then the age. So the beauty about the string formatter is that it automatically casts the integers to a string, unlike cases whereby you are working with the plus operator for the string concatenation. And lastly, I'm going to access these two variables so that we take note of case sensitivity in Python. So say print, then total, and then the other total. And you can always update the value of a variable at any time. So for example, if we update this variable total on line 14 to maybe 90 and the second variable to 89 and rerun the file, you can see that their values have been updated. Variables are also used whenever you want to store and manipulate data in your program. They are very essential for writing dynamic and flexible code. For example, if you wanted to ask a user for their name, you can go ahead and store a variable like username if you are working with a snake case. And then the difference here is that you're not going to assign this variable a name like Gorret. This becomes static. If you want to make the variable dynamic, Python has the input function, and the input function always reads the string by default from the keyboard. And you always have to enter a string literal within the quotes, and the string literal is always what the user is going to be told to do. So for this case, it's going to be enter your name, and you can always work with escape sequences like \t to create space just after this string, or a \n to create a new line. So I'll work with a \t, and having we gotten the user's name, we are going to go ahead and print it as username. So I'm going to run the file. So when I run the file, it says enter your name, then this is going to be Gorret Golden, and when I enter the name, it's then later on printed in the terminal. So I can update this sequence to a \n such that the name is created on a new line. And for now, I can first of all try to comment this out. So the difference is that when the file is executed, the user enters the name on a new line. So this is going to be Gorret Golden, then enter, then it's printed. Then you can always also try to customize the name better by saying, for example, your name is, and we access our variable that we have defined. So I'm going to run this up. So enter your name, then the output is your name is this and that. So it's pretty easy. It's always a matter of you choosing what to work with, and not forgetting that if you're choosing to work with string concatenation, you must be well conversant with typecasting of variable types. I hope you found this session insightful. Thanks for watching, and see you again in the next session.